When an avoidant realizes they're genuinely losing someone who matters to them, they deploy their most sophisticated and devastating manipulation tactic, the vulnerability bomb. This final dirty trick involves suddenly becoming emotionally available, sharing deep personal revelations, and expressing feelings they've withheld throughout the entire relationship. The timing isn't coincidental. It's a calculated psychological maneuver designed to re-establish emotional control, precisely when their usual strategies have failed and their former partner has begun to move on successfully. The vulnerability bomb represents the avoidance nuclear option, reserved for situations where they recognize that their typical patterns of withdrawal, mixed signals, and emotional unavailability have finally pushed someone beyond the point of tolerance. They deploy this tactic only when they sense genuine disengagement from their former partner, when their usual ability to maintain someone's emotional investment through breadcrumbs and false hope has been exhausted. The avoidant realizes that conventional manipulation strategies are no longer effective and escalates to their most powerful psychological weapon. This tactic is particularly insidious because it weaponizes the very thing their former partner has been desperately seeking throughout the relationship: genuine emotional connection and vulnerability. The avoidant suddenly becomes everything their former partner wanted them to be, but only after that person has begun to heal, establish boundaries, and recognize the relationship's fundamental dysfunction. The timing ensures maximum psychological impact while minimizing the avoidant's actual risk or commitment to sustained emotional availability. The psychology behind the vulnerability bomb. The vulnerability bomb works because it exploits the deep emotional investment and hope that their former partner has maintained despite repeated disappointment and rejection. Even when someone has intellectually recognized the avoidance patterns and made conscious decisions to move on, the sudden appearance of authentic emotional connection triggers powerful psychological responses that can override rational decision-making. The person experiences validation that their faith in the avoidance potential was justified, that their patience and understanding finally broke through the defensive walls. This manipulation is effective because it provides evidence for every excuse the person made for the avoidant's previous behavior. When the avoidant suddenly becomes vulnerable and emotionally expressive, it confirms the narrative that they were just scared, that their walls were protection rather than indifference, that they needed time and space to access their deeper feelings. The former partner feels vindicated in their belief that love and patience could eventually reach the avoidant's authentic self. The avoidant understands, often unconsciously, that their former partner has been starving for emotional connection and genuine intimacy throughout their relationship. They've watched their partner make excuses for their emotional unavailability, hoping and waiting for exactly the kind of vulnerability they're now strategically deploying. The vulnerability bomb feeds this emotional hunger at precisely the moment when the person was learning to find nourishment elsewhere. The timing of this manipulation also exploits the psychological principle of intermittent reinforcement, where unpredictable rewards create stronger attachment than consistent ones. After months or years of emotional breadcrumbs, the sudden feast of vulnerability and connection creates an intoxicating high that can erase memories of previous pain and disappointment. The former partner experiences the relationship through the lens of this new emotional availability, rather than the historical pattern of distance and rejection. Manifestations of the vulnerability bomb. The vulnerability bomb takes several specific forms, each designed to target different aspects of their former partner's emotional attachment and hope for connection. The most common manifestation involves the avoidant sharing childhood trauma, family dysfunction, or past relationship wounds that explain their emotional unavailability. They present these revelations as evidence of their trust in their former partner and their readiness to work through their issues together. These trauma revelations serve multiple manipulative functions simultaneously. They generate sympathy and understanding that makes it difficult for their former partner to maintain boundaries or continue moving on. They provide justification for all previous hurtful behavior while positioning the avoidant as a victim rather than someone who chose emotional unavailability. They create a sense of special intimacy and privilege, making their former partner feel uniquely trusted and important. Another manifestation involves sudden declarations of love, commitment, or future planning that directly contradict months or years of relationship avoidance. The avoidant might propose marriage, discuss moving in together, or make elaborate plans for shared experiences they previously showed no interest in pursuing. These declarations feel authentic because they often are authentic in the moment. The avoidant genuinely experiences fear of loss as love and mistake their attachment anxiety for romantic commitment. The avoidant might also deploy what appears to be genuine accountability, acknowledging their patterns, apologizing for specific hurtful behaviors, and expressing understanding of the pain they've caused. This accountability feels revolutionary to someone who has experienced months or years of defensiveness, blame shifting, and emotional invalidation. The sudden recognition and ownership of their behavior patterns creates hope that real change and growth are finally possible. Sexual vulnerability represents another powerful manifestation of this tactic. The avoidant might suddenly become sexually available, passionate, or intimate in ways they've never been before. They might share sexual fantasies, engage in previously refused activities, or demonstrate a level of physical affection that was absent throughout the relationship. This sudden sexual availability can create powerful bonding experiences that override intellectual awareness of the relationship's dysfunction. The strategic timing. The vulnerability bomb is almost always deployed when the avoidant recognizes specific signs that they're losing their former partner's emotional investment. These signs include their former partner stopping pursuit behaviors, establishing and maintaining firm boundaries, dating other people, or simply appearing genuinely happy and fulfilled without the avoidant's presence. The avoidant's psychological radar for detecting diminished significance triggers their deployment of this final manipulation tactic. The timing is also carefully calculated to coincide with moments of potential weakness in their former partner's resolve. This might include anniversaries of significant relationship moments, holidays when people feel emotionally vulnerable, or periods when their former partner is experiencing stress or loneliness from other life circumstances. The avoidant intuitively understands when their former partner might be most susceptible to renewed emotional connection. The avoidant often waits until their former partner has begun to establish new relationships or life patterns that don't include them. This timing ensures that the vulnerability bomb will disrupt their former partner's healing and growth process, creating confusion about whether to continue moving forward or return to the familiar but problematic relationship dynamic. The interference with genuine progress serves the avoidant's need to maintain relevance and control the temporary nature of the change. The most crucial aspect of understanding the vulnerability bomb is recognizing its temporary nature. The emotional availability and vulnerability the avoidant displays during this phase is typically unsustainable because it contradicts their fundamental psychological structure and coping mechanisms. They're operating outside their emotional comfort zone, motivated by fear of loss, rather than genuine desire for intimacy and connection. Once the immediate threat of losing their former partner subsides, the avoidant typically reverts to their previous patterns of emotional distance and unavailability. The vulnerability that seems so authentic during the crisis period gradually disappears as the avoidant's security increases and their fear of abandonment decreases. They begin to feel suffocated by the very intimacy they offered to prevent loss of the relationship. This reversion often happens gradually and subtly, making it difficult for their former partner to recognize immediately. The avoidant might begin to pull back emotionally while maintaining the appearance of commitment, or they might find reasons to create distance while insisting they still want the relationship. The person who returned based on the vulnerability bomb finds themselves back in familiar patterns of confusion, emotional starvation, and unmet needs. The temporary nature of the change also becomes evident in the avoidant's inability to maintain the level of emotional work and self-reflection they demonstrated during the crisis period. They might stop attending therapy, abandon self-improvement efforts, or lose interest in processing relationship dynamics once they feel secure in their partner's renewed commitment. The motivation for change was external pressure rather than internal desire for growth. Recognizing and resisting the manipulation. Understanding the vulnerability bomb as a manipulation tactic rather than genuine change requires examining the timing, motivation, and sustainability of the avoidant's newfound emotional availability. Genuine emotional growth happens gradually over time, with consistent effort and internal motivation, not suddenly in response to relationship threats. Real change involves sustained behavioral modification rather than dramatic emotional displays during crisis periods. One key indicator of manipulation versus authentic change is the avoidant's willingness to continue their emotional availability even when the relationship crisis has passed. Someone who is genuinely changing will maintain their vulnerability and emotional presence regardless of whether their partner seems likely to leave. Someone using the vulnerability bomb will gradually withdraw their emotional availability once they feel secure in their partner's commitment. Another indicator involves the avoidant's attitude toward accountability and responsibility for their previous behavior. Genuine change includes ongoing acknowledgement of past harm and consistent efforts to make amends through changed behavior. Manipulative vulnerability focuses on future potential rather than past accountability, asking for forgiveness and another chance without demonstrating sustained commitment to different patterns. The person targeted by the vulnerability bomb can also assess authenticity by examining whether the avoidant's emotional revelations feel designed to generate specific responses rather than simply sharing their internal experience. Manipulative vulnerability often feels performative, calculated to produce sympathy, understanding, or renewed commitment rather than emerging from genuine desire for emotional connection and intimacy. The aftermath and long-term consequences. When someone falls for the vulnerability bomb and returns to the relationship, they often find themselves in an even more painful position than before. They've experienced a taste of the emotional connection they've been craving, which makes the inevitable return to emotional distance and unavailability more devastating. They feel betrayed, not just by the avoidance withdrawal, but by their own decision to trust and hope again, despite evidence of established patterns. The aftermath also typically involves increased emotional volatility and instability in the relationship. The avoidant feels trapped by the expectations created during their vulnerable period, while their former partner feels confused and hurt by the gradual disappearance of the emotional availability that drew them back. Both people experience frustration with the gap between the relationship's potential and its reality. The person who returned often struggles with self-blame and confusion about their decision-making. They question their ability to judge character and situations accurately, wondering whether they're being unreasonable in expecting the emotional availability the avoidant demonstrated during the crisis period. This self-doubt can undermine their confidence in future relationships and their ability to maintain healthy boundaries. Alternative responses to the vulnerability bomb. Recognizing the vulnerability bomb as a manipulation tactic allows for more strategic responses that protect emotional well-being while still remaining open to genuine change if it occurs. One approach involves expressing appreciation for the avoidant's newfound emotional availability, while requiring sustained demonstration of change over time before considering reunion. This response acknowledges their effort while protecting against manipulation. Another approach involves requiring the avoidant to continue their emotional growth and self-work independently, without the reward of relationship reconciliation. This tests whether their motivation for change is internal or simply motivated by fear of loss. Someone who is genuinely changing will continue their growth work regardless of relationship outcomes, while someone using manipulation will lose interest once the immediate crisis passes. The most protective response involves maintaining established boundaries while observing the avoidance behavior over an extended period without romantic involvement. This allows their former partner to witness whether the emotional availability and vulnerability persist when there's no immediate relationship reward, providing clearer evidence of authentic versus manipulative change. Understanding the deeper pattern, the vulnerability bomb represents the culmination of the avoidant's broader pattern of using others' emotional investment against them. Throughout the relationship, they've trained their partner to accept minimal emotional availability while hoping for more authentic connection. The vulnerability bomb exploits this training by providing exactly what was withheld, but only when control and power are threatened. This pattern reveals the fundamental selfishness underlying avoidant attachment patterns that transcend simple fear or trauma responses. While avoidant behavior may stem from legitimate psychological wounds, the willingness to manipulate others' emotions for personal benefit indicates character issues that extend beyond attachment difficulties. The vulnerability bomb demonstrates calculated emotional manipulation rather than involuntary defensive responses. Understanding this deeper pattern helps explain why relationships with avoidance often feel so psychologically damaging and confusing. The avoidant's ability to provide genuine emotional connection when motivated by self-interest proves they possess the capacity for intimacy, but choose to withhold it under normal circumstances. This recognition can be both validating and devastating for their former partners. Recovery and moving forward. Recovering from the vulnerability bomb requires processing both the manipulation itself and the underlying dynamics that made the manipulation effective. This includes examining personal patterns of hope and accommodation that allow others to maintain emotional control through intermittent reinforcement. Recovery involves developing stronger boundaries and more realistic expectations about others' capacity and willingness to change. The experience can also provide valuable lessons about the difference between genuine emotional availability and strategic vulnerability. Learning to recognize authentic versus manipulative emotional expressions helps in future relationships and reduces susceptibility to similar manipulation tactics from others with personality disorders or emotional dysfunction. Most importantly, recovery involves recognizing that the avoidant's ability to deploy the vulnerability bomb doesn't indicate the relationship's potential for success. If anything, it demonstrates their willingness to exploit emotional investment and manipulate others' feelings for their own benefit. This recognition can provide closure and validation for the decision to maintain boundaries and continue moving forward independently. The vulnerability bomb represents the avoidant's final admission that they're losing control over someone they need to maintain their ego structure and emotional comfort. While it may feel like evidence of their authentic feelings, it's actually proof of their desperation to maintain power and relevance in their former partner's emotional world. Understanding this distinction provides the clarity necessary to make decisions based on reality rather than manipulation, hope rather than fantasy, and self-respect rather than accommodation.